This is the Flight Test Center at Edwards Air Force Base, California. Here, 8,000 men of the Air Research and Development Command, engineers from 20 major aircraft companies, and scientists of the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics are busy flight testing the future of American aviation. It's a big operation. Its birthplace, the world's largest natural airport, Rogers Dry Lake in the Mojave Desert of California. 64 square miles of level, rock-hard landing surface, hidden from the eyes of the world by a barrier of mountain and desert. History-making began here in 1942, during the dark days after Pearl Harbor. A temporary hangar built on the edge of the dry lake housed one of the best-kept secrets of the war. The Bell P-59, America's first jet-propelled airplane. For the first time, the desert calm was shattered by the roar of jet engines. A roar that has continued to this day, opening a new era in powered flight. From this modest beginning, the Flight Test Center has become one of the most important segments of our air arm. And the sun-baked sand of the dry lake is some of the most valuable real estate in the world. The pilots who owe their lives to these miles of level landing strip are legion. And because they were able to bring their hot airplanes in safely, they've saved the nation countless millions in dollars, and more important, in research time and equipment. Here are nested the strange new birds of the desert, the X-ships. In 1944, the United States Air Force and the NACA launched a program to explore transonic and supersonic flight, a program calling for the development of the X series, X for experimental, X for unknown. The rocket-powered Bell X-1 was the first of the series, and in 1947 blasted through the sound barrier, making its pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Charles E. Yeager, the world's first supersonic human. The Bell X-2 represents a more ambitious project, investigating the thermal barrier. This sleek stainless steel rocket plane was designed to fly supersonic and withstand temperature that would dangerously weaken ordinary aircraft metals. The needle-nosed X-3 was built by Douglas to obtain information about jet-powered supersonic flight. Northrop's flying wing, the X-4, investigated the characteristics of a tailless design, checking out its stability and control problems in the transonic range. The movable wings of the Bell X-5 answered many perplexing problems of wing sweep angles, and through its performance paved the way for the development of today's swept-winged aircraft. Bell X-1A, with Colonel Yeager as pilot, extended the frontiers of flight by reaching 1,650 miles per hour. 6 months later, Major Arthur Murray, Air Force pilot, rocketed to 90,000 feet. These, then, are the flights of discovery. And tomorrow's airplanes will reflect the knowledge game. The X-ships are the tools of the researcher, carving out the future of American aviation. The workshop is the desert air over Edwards Air Force Base. Let's take a closer look at this birthplace of supersonic flight. Visit Edwards and see for ourselves just what goes into the testing of an X-ship. Meeting the men who are responsible for high-speed research, men like Lieutenant Colonel Frank K. Everest, test pilot. Colonel Everest, Pete to his friends, is typical of the men who are symbolized by the whimsical sign over the door. Colonel Everest is a member of a very large team, a team that goes beyond the bounds of Edwards Air Force Base and encompasses ARDC in Baltimore, United States Air Force headquarters in Washington, and contractor companies in all parts of the country. Pete flies all kinds of aircraft, but a major task has been testing one of the most important of the nation's flying laboratories, the X-2, a handmade, one-of-its-kind experimental rocket plane. 4 years of design, 4 years work with new metals, and 2 years of testing are back of the X-2. This sleek stainless steel plane represents the answer of almost 300 engineers to the problem of aerodynamic heating, the thermal barrier. The X-2 is being prepared for a motor run now, a tie-down test. A tie-down is just what it says. The X-2 is firmly anchored to the concrete. The plane produces so much power that it might wind up in Los Angeles when the engine fires. It's like trying to harness a hurricane. A tie-down is sort of a dress rehearsal for actual flight. The general procedure is much the same. The fuel truck delivers its load to the X-2, pumping thousands of gallons of alcohol into the tanks of the bird.
Number 2 system pressure, normal.
Preparation for one flight may consume a week or a month. There are thousands of items to check.
Control movement okay, looks okay.
Other tanks are filled with liquid oxygen. It combines with the alcohol and supports combustion, acts as an air supply for the motor. Liquid oxygen is cold, almost 300 degrees below zero.
Attention, attention. There'll be a rocket firing in 30 seconds.
Here is sound you can feel and taste. Power, unimaginable power. This Curtiss-Wright rocket motor could move a modern battleship at high speed or pull the workload of 15 freight locomotives. The X-2's rocket engine is ground tested before every flight. With everything checked out satisfactorily, a flight is scheduled. First, there is a flight briefing, attended by the X-2 pilot, crew of the carrier, engineers and supervisors attached to the project. Every detail is carefully gone over.
Looks like we have a good day for it.
Hi, Pete.
Okay, let's get going.
Okay, takeoff at 0830. We'll be dropping at 0945 over Victorville. Landing on the Navajo Strip from east to west. Anything else, Pete?
I'll shoot for the double line, so be sure all personnel and vehicles are kept 2,000 feet back.
While the flight programming is being meticulously screened, the X-2 is also being readied. She's clean, streamlined, and power-packed. The swept-wing beauty is towed to the ramp and loaded into the bomb bay of a B-50, converted to carry her aloft. The X-2 could take off from the ground under her own power, but to save every drop of fuel for high-altitude runs, the B-50 lifts her 5 or 6 miles into the air. Then the X-2 takes over, almost like a two-stage rocket, climbing, reaching for 10 or 15 more miles of thin-aired space. Each step higher gives man new altitudes to conquer. Someday, the moon. But that's the future. Right now, we're laying the groundwork. The two birds are finally mated. Now come the final hours of preparation. Checking, examining, and re-examining all through the night. The routine of flight testing. A slow, methodical, round-the-clock routine. The pilot's day starts early. Quick breakfasts, quick goodbyes. His is a challenging job, but it's part of a routine. Now the schedule takes over. Nothing is left to chance. The checklist becomes your only master. Checking and double-checking is your margin of safety. This is where it begins, in a locker room. But the big game is the serious work of research. Research that may save the nation's aviation industry years of effort, millions of dollars, and countless lives.
Attention, attention. All flight personnel assembled by the B-50.
Here is the flight team, the crew, the observers, and a young man from a small town in West Virginia, a career Air Force officer, the pilot of a multi-million-dollar flying laboratory. This is the man who is the key to years of work, concentrated days of preparation.
Attention, attention. B-50 crew board the carrier.
The X-2 carries instruments, a quarter-ton of them, that radio to ground details of stress, strain, and temperatures. But this is the man who gathers the vital information. He sits alone in the nose of the bomber, seemingly relaxed, but totally conscious of the assignment ahead. He sits alone. But the hundreds of engineers, technicians, Air Force personnel who have lived with the X-2 are riding with him.
Edwards Tower, Bell B-50, over.
Go ahead, Bell.
Bell B-50, ready for takeoff, over.
Wind southwest 7, cleared for takeoff, over.
High-speed jets carrying cameramen and observers take off to join the B-50 and X-2. These are the chase planes which report on the X-2, as long as they can keep up with the rocket-powered craft. The B-50 is now reaching for its rendezvous, the launching altitude for the X-2. The last checks are being made.
Item 14, check. Launch panel camera on. Okay, Pete. We're at altitude. Enter the X-2 cockpit. Ready for cockpit check, Pete. Okay, oxygen pressure normal. Warning system switch on. Pressure demand regulator on. Check. Emergency cabin pressure off. Off. Check. F-86 Chase, this is Bell B-50. How do you read me, over? I read you loud and clear. F-100 Chase, this is Bell B-50. How do you read me? Loud and clear. Okay, install the X-2 canopy. 1 minute to launch.
It sounds so nonchalant. It looks so routine. A moment before the curtain lifts, man and plane pitted against heat and space.
Launch switch to drop position. Okay, Pete. We can drop you anytime. Give me the word for the countdown. Okay, counting from 5 to 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Dropper.
There she goes.
On the ground, radar registers the height and speed of the plane.
Come on, bring it faster. She's moving.
Recorder's running. All channels open.
Every detail of the plane's performance is recorded. Instruments measuring the forces exerted on the X-2 during flight. Temperature, fuel consumption, strains, stresses.
Man, look at that baby go. I wonder how he feels now.
Feel? You're too busy to feel anything. Your hands are full with one of the hottest ships ever built. You're blasting into unknown regions of speed, temperature, altitude. One pilot and one plane, collecting information that will determine the designs of tomorrow. The course for flights into the future is being charted, up where the world looks round, a little closer to the stars. Now is the time man makes history alone, out of sight, except to the cold metallic eye of radar, whose humming recorders measure the flight's progress as a single mechanical line. For anxious observers on the ground, there is only the empty sky, endless, unresponsive.
F-86 is spell control. Can you see him? Over. Negative, out of sight. Hold it, there he is, I see him. 10 o'clock high, heading north fast. He's shut off power and he's gliding. Hey Pete, this is F-86. Do you read me? Yeah, boy. I'm about 10 miles north of the base. About 30,000. I have you. How'd she go? Real good. No sweat. Does everything look okay on the outside? I'm just catching up. Looks okay from here, Pete. Good deal. I'm over the south end of the lake, going to make a left-hand pattern. On my final, I've got about 200 indicated. Can you give me my altitude on landing? You're going about 50 feet. 40 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, 5 feet. Looks good. Looks good. Mighty fine.
Let's get that canopy out. Don't get it up. He doesn't look like it's around there.
Oh, great.
Okay, how's the run go, Pete?
Colonel Pete Everest is hardly out of the cockpit when the post-flight interrogation begins. Questions, questions, questions. This will go on for hours, for days. The pilot's reactions will be matched with those of the recording instruments he carried miles into the sky. The information obtained will appear in tomorrow's airplanes and today's headlines. Washington, D.C. The Defense Department announced that the Bell X-2 is the world's highest and fastest plane. And during all this, the next flight is being planned. For flight testing is a never-ending series of steps, each one contributing to America's leadership in the air. Leadership that can only be maintained by constant probing into the unknown. Today's first-line planes are the result of yesterday's planning. And in the accelerated rush of modern air technology, only two types of airplanes can exist. Those so new they are experimental, or so old they are obsolescent. Flight testing is a plunge into the future. Tomorrow we'll find the X-ships being readied for further assaults on the far frontiers of flight. There is only one goal of air research, progress. There is only one motto. It can be read at the gate of Edwards Air Force